Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, and then we examine a single relevant question based on what that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark, and we're looking at a passage in Job chapter 35. At the beginning of this story about Job, his struggles, we're introduced to his three friends who come to console him in his grief, and they wound up accusing him of having this hidden sin. And in chapter 32, though, a fourth man is introduced. His name is Elihu. It says this in chapter 32. It says, Job's three friends refused to reply further to him because he kept insisting on his innocence. Then Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite of the clan of Ram, became angry. He was angry because Job refused to admit that he had sinned and that God was right in punishing him. He was also angry with Job's three friends, for they made God appear to be wrong by their inability to answer Job's arguments. Elihu had waited for the others to speak to Job because they were older than he. But when he saw that they had no further reply, he spoke out angrily. So the thing we can see in chapter 32 is that he is younger than his other friends, and he had waited on them because he was trying to show some respect out of their age and wisdom. But when they were silenced by Job's objections, Elihu becomes angry and he speaks in this harsh tone. And we see this secondary theme in Job all throughout, and we've talked about it before, the question of who is wise and who is the source of wisdom. So like Job's other three friends, Elihu sets himself up as a wise man in spite of his youth. So we don't know how young, we just know that he's younger, and he sets himself up as a wise man. And like most young men, Elihu believes that he has all the answers and asserts that he has something new to say that has not already been said. He claims in chapter 32, he says, if Job had been arguing with me, I would not answer with your kind of logic. I think myself that when I was younger, I was smarter than I am now. I realize how much I don't know now. But instead of saying something new, he sets out on this same arguments that the others have been making, claiming that Job suffers because he has sinned. You can see that in chapter 34 in several places. So Elihu makes an interesting claim, though, pointing to the fact that God is higher than humans. He's above the clouds in the sky. This is chapter 35 now. He sees God as untouched and unaffected by man's sin. Elihu seems to believe that God is this dictator that kind of throws his weight around. He says God has the right to speak or to be silent. He says God judges sin and punishes the godless. God cannot be seen by man if he doesn't want to be. The imagery is that God is so above, so untouchable that he can do what he wants regardless of how it might affect humans. God does not respond to the prayer of the arrogant. God cannot be understood. God answers to no man. God uses suffering to prevent man from sinning. God despises the proud. And so on the surface, these seem like noble statements about God, but if you take them collectively, they form a picture of a God who is this dictator, this boss of a man who's pushing himself around. Elihu's perspective of God's sovereignty seems to come from his own youthful impetuousness, would be a good word. And so several passages in Elihu's speech can be seen through the lens of this young, brash man who's projecting his own bent perceptions onto God. So, Jay, the things I want to talk about today is, let's start here. How often do you think our perception of God is really a projection of our own issues?
I think it happens more than we probably realize. In this story, we got a lot going on. You got Job going through all that he's doing and experiencing, and that no doubt shapes some of his perception of who God is. Then you've got his, quote, friends. I believe they were friends, acquaintances, but even they make their assumptions of God based on what they see Job going through, and they're false assumptions. So we make decisions about who God is, or we think God is, based on not only our circumstances, but I'm convinced what we see the circumstances, lives of other people too, whether it's an individual, whether it's a group of people. And it's easy to misread that. And throughout, and we're going to be doing multiple podcasts in this book, you see this theme. It's easy to misread and say, we're experiencing good because of this, when that may not be the case.
Mhm.
And like Job right now, we experience bad or pain because of this, when they may not be right at all. And so
Right.
I think all of our life experience, our past experience, the way we were raised, what we've been through in our life, the people around us, I think all those things shape us more than we realize as to how we see and think about God.
Is there a particular trait or facet or role of God that you think an earthly situation or relationship shapes more than others?
Well, I'll just give one personal one. Growing up, I was very fortunate, blessed to be raised in, quote, a Christian home with Christian parents. But not only my parents, but the church I was raised in, the mentality was you have to walk this very narrow, thin line, or else judgment is coming fast and harsh. And now, looking back on it, the truth of the matter is it was quite confusing, even as a young person, as a preteen, because on one side you hear God is love, He's patient, He's kind, He's merciful, but yet on the other side it was constantly He's judgmental, and He's got this wrath, and it literally, it was like you didn't even know where you stood to Him at the moment. I may have done something intentionally, I would know about that. But if I had even done something unintentionally, I'm like, I'm not even sure where my standing is with God. And that was a tough place to live and to be in. And so that would be one example of experiencing what I am 100% convinced people had good motives for how they were trying to explain the gospel.
And bad methods.
But bad methods, yes.
I think probably for me, good, some bad, some expanding, some limiting. My parents shaped who I thought God was. My mom and dad are completely different. They have just completely different personalities. So I had a broad spectrum of that. But I think Jesus uses frequently the Father. And I think when we think of the Father, we either relate in terms of the good experiences we've had with our dad,
Or the
bad experiences. And the reason I say parenting is because I think in this concept of God, it's easy to mesh the two of them together.
Yes.
Mom and dad. And we're probably getting a fuller picture when we examine the two of them together than we are, if we look at one or the other. But our experiences with grace will often put limits on what we think God's grace is, or even the things that we'll show grace for.
Yeah, because I think what we have experienced through life, regardless of if it goes back to early childhood or early adulthood up to whatever stage of life we are in now, whatever we experienced, it shapes our viewpoint of God. But the point you made, I think is absolutely true. What we experience, good, bad, or indifferent, tends to be expounded toward others. I truly believe if we experienced a lot of love and grace and patience, that we tend to lean that way toward others on a larger degree. And if it was just the opposite, then we tend to be more judgmental and harsh with people because of what we experienced. So it not only shapes our view of God, but the reality is it overwhelmingly shapes how we respond to people.
If you were talking to somebody who had no concept of God, how would you describe him? What would be some of the things you would?
Well, that certainly would be a challenge. I'm trying to imagine myself in a similar conversation maybe today, at lunch that I'm having with somebody, and they ask that similar question. Generic descriptions and things. He's a God of love. That's his nature. That's his character. That's who he is. I would try to set some framework about his love, his holiness, his deity, his sovereignty, his patience. But then there has to be some degree of counterbalance in that, because he is all these things, he is a holy God, and he has to deal with these things. And I don't think it's a lot different than parents and what you were talking about. You have parents that are absolutely loving, caring, compassionate, patient, and the vast majority of the time things are lovely. But there are certain things that are so egregious that a loving, caring, patient parent will step in and deal with an individual. And I would talk to the person about the concept of sin and fallen man. Not in a deep theological way, but God is love. He's grace, patient, merciful. He's all those things. But that demands something of us because of who he is and his nature, and that he desires a relationship with us. Throughout this book of Job, oftentimes the conversations, it's like God is abstract rather than personal in relationship. And I think so many times we miss that whole concept. He is a very personable God.
Because I was thinking, even as you were talking, if somebody asked me to describe God, where would I start? And oddly, and I know this, and I know some of it's personality driven. Okay, I don't start with loving. That's not. But if I don't think that would be like trait number one somebody would describe me either. Now, but I think of righteous, holy, full of grace and truth. But what I was thinking is, as I was thinking of how my personality is driving my own description. Because I don't think you and I are much different in this particular instance. I like black and white. I don't like a lot of gray. It's either this or it's this. And if it's one of these, that's fine. I can live with it. The middle, the mushy, messy, I struggle with. But there are other people who lead with love, right? And the argument becomes, well, is he more one? Because the Bible says God is love, yes, but it also says God is holy. It also says God is righteous. It also says God is full of grace and full of truth. And I think recently on a podcast we recorded, I mentioned this, but I heard Robert Morris say, he said he was talking about the attributes of God. And he said, next week I'm going to preach on this. And he said, the mistake that we make is we think that God is like us, where he has some grace and some truth and some holiness and some righteousness, because we do. He said, but God is 100% of those things.
Yes.
He is all of it, but explaining that to somebody who doesn't know him is hard to do.
That's going to be a long conversation. And really, to some degrees, are beyond our human limitations. Because even as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, I want to back that conversation up and start even before that, and identify him as one, as sovereign. He is God, not a God. He is God. And then he's creator, which means we come under that. That's part. So therefore, we are subjective to him, and then maybe lean into. So it would be a complicated.
It is, but the thing I think you talked about him being personal. That's one of the greatest things that we can share with people.
Yes,
is I have a relationship with him, and I'm learning more about him every day.
Every day, yeah.
And you can have a relationship with him, and you can learn more about him every day. And where he's going to start with you on your relationship may be different.
100%.
He may show you his holiness right out of the gate. Right.
You're right, and that sometimes is problematic for us as individuals, because your journey and starting point may not be the same as mine, but yet my concept is, I make the assumption is everybody starts here walks it out this way, when that's just not the case.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around the book of Job.